What was the true moment that broke the ideological spine of the Third Reich? Not Stalingrad, not the Normandy landings, but perhaps a moment recorded in pencil on June 4, 1943, in the small Texas town of Mexia. A German prisoner, Unoffizier Vera Burkhardt, wrote secretly in a hidden diary, "The Americans must be lying to us. No nation could possess such abundance while fighting a war on two fronts." Through the train window, he had just witnessed something that contradicted 3 years of Nazi propaganda, an endless constellation of electric lights blazing. Across the Texas plains at 10 o'clock at night, veterans of Rommel's Africa Corps stepped down from a passenger train. Not cattle cars, but cushioned Pullman coaches. The entire population of Mexia had turned out to witness their arrival. What none of them knew was that this moment would trigger the most profound psychological transformation in modern prisoner of war history, a systematic demolition of Nazi ideology through the sheer display of American industrial capacity. The mathematics of Allied victory were written not only in battle plans, but in production statistics that would soon shatter every assumption these soldiers carried about their enemies, their homeland, and their cause. The collapse had begun on May 13, 1943, in Tunisia. General Jürgen von Arnim, Rommel's replacement, surrendered along with approximately 250,000 to 275,000 German and Italian soldiers. The numbers fluctuated as scattered units capitulated over several days. The Wehrmacht's most experienced desert fighters, men who had driven the British back to Egypt, who had earned the grudging respect of Montgomery himself, were suddenly prisoners of war. Among them was Hetman Friedrich Radke, holder of the Iron Cross First Class, veteran of the French campaign, wounded twice in North Africa. His diary, discovered decades later in the National Archives, would provide historians with the most detailed account of the psychological impact of American captivity on German soldiers. The journey from defeat to revelation began in the port of Oran, Algeria, as Radke and 30,000 other prisoners waited in makeshift camps for transport ships. American efficiency was already beginning to crack their preconceptions. The U.S. Army processed thousands of prisoners daily with an organizational precision that exceeded anything the Wehrmacht had achieved even at the height of its power. Identity cards photographed and filed, medical examinations completed, inoculations administered, Geneva Convention rights explained in fluent German by American, officers trained specifically for this moment. But the first real shock came with the food. Oberreiter Hans Müller, captured with the 21st Panzer Division, wrote to his mother 8 months later, "In the cage at Oran, while we waited for ships, the Americans fed us better than we had eaten in 6 months of desert warfare. White bread, real coffee, meat twice a day. We thought it was propaganda, that they were trying to impress us. We didn't realize this was their standard military ration." The Liberty ships that would carry them across the Atlantic were themselves monuments to American industrial capacity. The SS Robert E. Peary had been built in 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes at Kaiser Shipyards in Richmond, California, a fact that would have been dismissed as impossible. Propaganda, if the Germans had known it. These vessels, produced at a rate of 3 per day at the peak of production, were returning from delivering supplies to the European theater. Rather than sail back empty, they carried human cargo, up to 30,000 prisoners per month by summer 1943. The 2-week Atlantic crossing in July 1943 provided the second phase of psychological demolition. Feldwebel Kurt, Zimmermann of the 90th Light Division, kept a detailed account that survived. In letters to his family after repatriation, the ship's crew, he noted, disposed of more food waste each day than his entire company had received in weekly rations during the final months in Africa. The American sailors threw away half-eaten steaks, whole loaves of bread, gallons of milk that had sat too long, Zimmermann wrote. They did this openly, without thought, not to mock us, but because to them, this waste meant nothing. Their supply was limitless. The ships themselves became floating classrooms in American power. Prisoners discovered that the vessel carrying them was one of 2,000 Fetzaradan, Liberty ships that would be built during the war, each one requiring 250,000 parts, assembled from components manufactured in 32 states. The engines, they learned from talkative American guards, were built in 3 separate factories, each producing 900 horsepower. Cylinders that were then assembled in ports that had barely existed 2 years. Earlier, Oberstleutnant Wilhelm von Stauborn, whose aristocratic Prussian family had served in every German war since Frederick the Great, would later write in his memoirs, "As our ship approached the American coast, I watched the radar antenna rotating above the bridge. This technology, which we believed only we, and perhaps the British, possessed in limited quantities, was standard equipment on a cargo vessel. It was then I first suspected that Germany had already lost the war." August 2, 1943, Norfolk Naval Base, Virginia. The first sight of America shattered the last remnants of Nazi propaganda about American industrial weakness. The Norfolk base sprawled across 4,300 acres, its docks stretching for miles, its cranes loading and unloading dozens of ships simultaneously. In a single day, this one port handled more tonnage than the entire German port of Hamburg managed in a week. Gefreiter Johann Weber, a factory worker from the Ruhr before his conscription, counted 47 cargo ships in various stages of loading or unloading. Each crane, he noted in his secret diary, lifted loads that would have required a dozen men and horses in Germany. They moved with electric power, smoothly, continuously, without the coal smoke that choked our industrial cities. The prisoners were formed into columns for the march to the waiting trains. Along the route, they passed parking lots filled with civilian automobiles, hundreds of them belonging to dock workers. In Germany, private automobile ownership remained a privilege of the wealthy and the party elite. The Volkswagen, promised to the German people since 1934, remained a propaganda dream, with fewer than 1,000 ever delivered to civilians. Here, ordinary laborers drove to work in their own cars, but nothing prepared them for the trains themselves. Not boxcars, not the 40 and 8 wagons, 40 men or 8 horses that had carried German troops across Europe, but full passenger coaches, Pullman cars with padded seats that converted to sleeping berths, dining cars with white tablecloths and silver cutlery, observation cars with panoramic windows. Hedman Radke wrote, "We boarded like tourists, not prisoners." The American guards seemed almost embarrassed by the comfort. One sergeant apologized that the air conditioning wasn't working properly in our car. Air conditioning in August. We had believed such luxury existed only in Hitler's personal train. The 3-day train journey from Norfolk to the camps of Texas and Oklahoma would prove more destructive to Nazi ideology than any military defeat. As the trains rolled through Virginia, the prisoners pressed their faces against windows, witnessing an America that couldn't exist according to everything they had been told. Every small town blazed with illumination. Martinsville, Danville, Greensboro, communities that in Germany would have been lucky to have a single electric street lamp displayed, illuminated shop windows, electric signs, houses with lights burning in multiple rooms. The trains passed factories running night shifts, their windows glowing, parking lots full even at midnight. Oberreiter Müller, whose father was a Nazi party bloc leader in Hamburg, wrote in a letter discovered in 1987, "We passed through dozens of cities that first night. Everyone had more electricity than all of Hamburg. The guards told us this was normal, that every American town had electricity since the 1920s. I called him a liar. He just shrugged and said we would see. In Roanoke, Virginia, the train stopped for water and coal. The prisoners watched as American railway workers performed. In 30 minutes, what would have taken 2 hours in Germany, automated coal loaders, electric water pumps, mechanized lubrication systems. More disturbing still was the casual wealth of the workers themselves. They wore leather boots that would have cost a German laborer 2 months' wages. They drank Coca-Cola from glass bottles and threw the empties into bins without thought. They smoked cigarettes continuously, stubbing them out half-finished. Fahnenjunker Heinrich Müller, an electrical engineer from Siemens before the war, calculated that the single railway yard they stopped in used more electricity in 1 hour than his entire district in Berlin used in a day. The waste was magnificent, he wrote. They left lights burning in empty buildings. Electric fans ran in vacant rooms. It was the carelessness of infinite resource. As the trains crossed into Tennessee and Kentucky, the prisoners encountered American industrial power in full display. Through the windows, they watched endless factories, each one larger than anything most had seen in Germany. The Alcoa aluminum plant in Tennessee stretched for 3 miles along the river, its electric furnaces consuming 175,000 kilowatts of power, more than the entire city of Munich. Near Louisville, the trains slowed as they passed the Rubber Town complex, where synthetic rubber plants had sprung from empty fields in just 18 months. 4 massive facilities, each employing thousands of workers, producing 800,000 tons of synthetic rubber annually. Germany, despite inventing the process, had never managed more than 120,000 tons in its best year. Oberleutnant Erich Hoffmann, a chemist from IG Farben, understood the implications immediately. In a post-war interview, he recalled, "I knew those plants. I could see the distillation columns, the catalytic crackers. Each facility was more advanced than anything we had built, and there were 4 of them just in this one location. They told us there were dozens more across the country." The trains passed Ford's Willow Run plant outside Detroit, visible from miles away. This single factory, built in just 9 months, produced a B-24 Liberator bomber every 63 minutes. At peak production, 42,000 workers assembled bombers from 1,550,000. Parts manufactured by 1,500 subcontractors. The plant consumed 2.5 million square feet of floor space and used more electricity than the entire German city of Cologne. Hauptmann Wehrli, a Luftwaffe pilot shot down over Tunisia, pressed his face against the window as they passed. He counted 17 B-24s, in various stages of completion visible from the train. We had been told American planes were inferior, hastily built, would fall apart in combat, he later said. But I could see the precision of the assembly lines, the quality of the construction. These were not inferior aircraft. They were simply built faster than we could imagine possible. The deeper the trains penetrated into America, the more complete became the destruction of Nazi mythology. In St. Louis, they crossed the Mississippi River on the Eads Bridge, while below them, barges carried more grain than the entire German harvest of 1942. The prisoners could see grain elevators stretching along both banks, each one holding enough wheat to feed a German city for months. Unteroffizier Karl Schmidt, a farmer's son from Bavaria, wrote in his diary, "The Americans transport food as we transport ammunition, in endless quantities. Without concern for loss, I watched them loading a single barge with enough wheat to feed my entire village for 5 years. The crane operator was eating a sandwich with meat thicker than our weekly ration." The arrival at the camps themselves provided the next level of cognitive demolition. Camp Hearn, Texas, built in just 4 months, housed between 3,000 and 4,800 prisoners in conditions that exceeded what most had known as civilians. Wooden barracks with electric lights, flush toilets, hot showers, and steam heat. Each building constructed with more lumber than entire German villages possessed. The camp hospital astounded the medical personnel among the prisoners. Oberstarzt Dr. Friedrich Bauer, chief surgeon of the 164th Light Division, found himself in a facility better equipped than most German civilian hospitals. X-ray machines, surgical equipment, pharmaceutical supplies that had been unavailable in Germany since 1941, all standard provision for enemy prisoners. They had penicillin, Dr. Bauer would later testify, this miracle drug that we had only heard rumors about. They used it freely, even on prisoners with minor infections. German soldiers were dying for want of basic sulfa drugs, and the Americans were giving us their most advanced medicine without hesitation. The camp kitchen became another classroom in American prosperity. Prisoners assigned to cooking duties discovered walk-in refrigerators, electric mixers, automated dishwashers, and gas ranges that could prepare meals for 5,000 men. The daily ration included fresh milk, eggs, meat, vegetables, and white bread, quantities that German civilians hadn't seen since 1939. Feldwebel Otto Krebs, a former hotel chef from Munich, wrote, "Today we threw away more food than my family has seen in 3 years. Not spoiled food, simply excess. The American regulations require we prepare 10% more than needed to ensure every prisoner receives full rations. The surplus is discarded. I wept as I threw perfectly good bread into the garbage." By September 1943, the labor shortage in American agriculture led to the employment of prisoners of war in fields and factories across the country. This decision, driven by necessity, would prove more destructive to Nazi ideology than any propaganda program could have achieved. Groups of prisoners were trucked daily to work sites, traveling through the American heartland without blindfolds or restricted routes. They saw everything: the endless fields of corn and wheat, the factories running 3 shifts, the shops full of goods, the parking lots full of cars, the houses with refrigerators and radios. At a cotton gin outside Houston, Unteroffizier Herbert Lang watched a single machine process more cotton in 1 hour than his entire village could have handled in a month using traditional methods. The gin was powered by electricity from the Colorado River Authority, part of a rural electrification program that had brought power to 90% of Texas farms by 1943. The farmer who owned the gin was nobody special, Lang recorded. Not aristocracy, not a party member, just a farmer. Yet he had electricity, running water, a truck, a car, and a tractor. His workers ate lunch from boxes, containing more food than German workers received in a week. And this was normal. Every farm we passed was the same. In Nebraska, prisoners worked in sugar beet fields, witnessing agricultural mechanization that defied comprehension. A single combine harvester, they learned, could do the work of 100 men. The fields stretched to the horizon, each one larger than entire German counties. Gefreiter Wilhelm Hoffmann, working on a farm outside Scottsbluff, wrote, "The farmer's son, a boy of 16, drove a tractor worth more than everything my father had earned in his lifetime. When I mentioned this, the boy laughed and said it wasn't even a particularly good tractor. His father was waiting for a new model from John Deere that would be even better." Christmas 1943 provided the most profound psychological impact. American organizations, churches, and civic groups sent 500,000 Christmas packages to German prisoners, enemies who had been trying to kill American soldiers months earlier. Each package contained cigarettes, candy, toiletries, and games. At Camp Hearn, Texas, the local Methodist church choir performed Christmas carols in German for the prisoners. Women from Hearn sent in homemade cookies and cakes. The Boy Scouts delivered handmade Christmas cards. Oberleutnant Walter Müller, whose brother had died in the bombing of Hamburg, wrote, "They know we are their enemies. Many have sons and husbands fighting against our armies. Yet they show us Christian charity, not propaganda, but genuine kindness. What kind of people treat enemies this way? Only those absolutely certain of victory and secure in their power. The Christmas feast itself defied comprehension. Turkey, ham, mashed potatoes, gravy, vegetables, pies, ice cream. Quantities of food that Germany hadn't seen since before the First World War. "We ate like kings," wrote Feldwebel Hans Bauer. Better than German generals eat, better than party leaders. And this was not special. The guards told us this was a normal American Christmas dinner, that every American family was eating the same meal. If they can feed prisoners this way, what must their own soldiers eat? By early 1944, over 40,000 German prisoners were enrolled in educational programs. They studied English, American history, mathematics, and sciences. The University of Chicago provided correspondence courses. Stanford University sent professors to lecture on democracy and economics. The thirst for knowledge was insatiable. Prisoners who had been told Americans were cultureless barbarians discovered. Libraries with millions of books. Universities that welcomed all social classes. Scientific research that led the world. Dr. Wilhelm von Braun, a physicist conscripted from the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute, attended lectures on atomic physics at Camp Shelby. He later wrote, "American professors, including Jewish refugees from Germany, taught us without hatred. They spoke of science as universal, belonging to all humanity. They were years ahead of German research, and they shared knowledge with enemies. This generosity of spirit was incomprehensible to minds shaped by Nazi ideology." The camp theaters showed American films, not propaganda, but regular Hollywood productions. Prisoners watched Gone with the Wind, seeing a depiction of American defeat and recovery that resonated with their own situation. They saw The Grapes of Wrath, amazed that Americans would show such self-criticism to enemies. Lieutenant Joseph Kramer wrote, "They hide nothing. They show their problems, their failures, their conflicts. Yet this honesty makes them stronger, not weaker." In Germany, such criticism would mean death. Here it is considered patriotic. June 6, 1944. When news of the Normandy invasion reached the camps, German prisoners experienced their final ideological collapse. The scale of the operation, 6,000 ships, 11,000 aircraft, 156,000 men in the first wave, demonstrated American organizational capacity beyond Nazi. Germany's wildest dreams. Prisoners at Camp Shelby watched newsreels of the invasion within days. They saw the endless streams of ships, the artificial harbors, the supply system that delivered 15,000 tons daily across open beaches. Oberst Friedrich von Toben wrote, "We knew then that everything was lost, not just the war, but the entire Nazi project. We had challenged the world's greatest industrial power with fairy tales and racial mythology. We sent horses against their trucks, rifles against their automatic weapons, courage against their unlimited resources. Between 1945 and 1946, 371,683 German prisoners were repatriated from American camps. They returned to a Germany divided, destroyed, and destitute. But they brought with them something precious: knowledge of how a democratic, industrial society functioned. The German prisoners who experienced American prosperity became unwitting agents of transformation in post-war Germany. They had seen industrial efficiency, agricultural productivity, and democratic prosperity. They knew Reconstruction was possible because they had witnessed a society that had achieved it. Many former prisoners rose to prominence in West Germany's Reconstruction. Hans Kroll, prisoner at Camp Shelby, became West German ambassador to the United States. Walter Hallstein, who taught classes at Camp Como, became president of the European Commission. Rüdiger von Marr, held at Camp Herne, served as German permanent representative to the United Nations. They brought American methods to German industry, American efficiency to German agriculture, and American democratic ideals to German politics. Historians have called the German prisoner of war experience in America one of the most successful re-education programs in history. Dr. Arnold Kramer, the leading historian of German POWs in America, concluded, "America won the propaganda war not through clever messages, but through sheer reality. Every full meal, every electric light, every working toilet was an argument against Nazism." The POWs were converted by prosperity. In 1985, on the 40th anniversary of the war's end, surviving German prisoners held a reunion in Austin, Texas. Over 500 former prisoners returned to America, many bringing their families to show them where their transformation had begun. Former Oberreiter Hans Vea, who had been held at Fort Robinson, Nebraska, and later became a physician, spoke at the reunion. Life in the camps was a vast improvement for many of us, who had grown up in cold water flats in Germany. We discovered running water, central heating, and abundant food. But more than that, we discovered dignity. Former Stabsfeldwebel Kurt Mehr, who had worked on farms in Iowa, added, "The farmers treated us not as enemies, but as young men far from home. They shared their meals, their knowledge, sometimes their homes. This humanity from people whose sons were fighting against us, this changed us forever." The magnitude of this transformation is measured in stark statistics. Of 371,683 German POWs held in America, fewer than 1% attempted escape. Post-war surveys showed that 95% rated their treatment as good or excellent. Most remarkably, thousands maintained correspondence with American families for decades after the war. The German POWs who witnessed American industrial might didn't just witness history, they were transformed by it. Their captivity became education. Their defeat became enlightenment. They returned to Germany not as defeated enemies, but as witnesses to what free societies could achieve. The economic miracle that transformed West Germany in the 1950s was built on foundations laid in American prison camps, where enemy soldiers learned that prosperity came not from conquest, but from freedom. Not from racial superiority, but from human dignity. Not from totalitarian control, but from democratic cooperation. At the 1985 reunion dinner, former Oberst Hermann Gutz, then 78 years old, delivered the keynote that captured the essence of the transformation. We came to America as enemies, as Nazis, as believers in a lie. We left as friends, as Democrats, as men who had seen the truth. America showed us that strength comes not from conquest, but from production. Not from hatred, but from diversity. Not from tyranny, but from freedom. The Germany that rose from the ashes was built on lessons learned in American prison camps. We who came as conquerors left as students. The story of German POWs in America is ultimately a story of redemption through revelation. It proves that sometimes the greatest victories are won not through destruction, but through demonstration. Not through propaganda, but through prosperity. Not through hatred, but through humanity. In their transformation lay the seeds of Europe's post-war redemption and the final, quiet defeat of the Nazi dream.